Single mother applies for janitor job. HR cries when they see his resume. The eviction notice trembled in Rachel's hands like a fragile butterfly with broken wings. Bright red letters screamed, "Final notice," across the top, each word a dagger piercing through her carefully constructed facade of strength. She stood frozen in the doorway of her small apartment, the paper feeling heavier than the world itself. "Mommy," 8-year-old Emma's voice floated from behind her, sweet and trusting. "What's that paper?" Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She quickly folded the notice and tucked it into her purse, turning with a smile that felt like it might crack her face in half. "Nothing important, sweetheart. Just grown-up mail." But 6-year-old Tyler wasn't so easily fooled. His dinosaur-obsessed mind processed details the way a paleontologist examined fossils, methodically, thoroughly. "Your hands are shaking, Mommy. Are you scared?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Rachel knelt down, gathering both children into her arms, breathing in their scent of strawberry shampoo and playground dirt. How could she tell them that in 30 days, they might not have a home? How could she explain that the part-time retail job she'd managed to secure after David's death wasn't enough, would never be enough? "Sometimes grown-ups get a little worried about boring things like bills," she whispered into Emma's hair. "But you know what? Mommy always figures it out." Tyler pulled back, his serious brown eyes, so much like his father's, studying her face. "Like when Daddy was sick and you figured out how to make the medicine taste like chocolate?" The memory hit Rachel like a physical blow. David, lying in their bed, his once strong frame reduced to sharp angles and hollow cheeks, refusing to take his medication until she'd mixed it with chocolate syrup and called it superhero fuel. He'd played along for the children, pretending the bitter pills gave him magical powers, even as they both knew he was dying. "Exactly like that," she managed, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. But as she tucked the children into bed that night, reading them a story about brave knights and magical kingdoms, Rachel's mind raced through calculations that never added up. Rent, $1,200. Utilities, $150. Groceries, $300. Childcare, $600. Her paycheck, $1,400. The math was cruel and unforgiving. After David's funeral expenses, his medical bills, and the mountain of debt they'd accumulated during his illness, there was nothing left. No savings, no family to turn to, no safety net. Just a single mother with 2 children and a future that looked as dark as the winter sky outside their window. She sat at her kitchen table until 3 a.m., circling job listings in the newspaper with a red pen, each circle a prayer, each application a lifeline thrown into an ocean of uncertainty. Fast food worker, night shift security guard, house cleaner. Each job paid barely above minimum wage, but she circled them anyway. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The next morning, as she walked Emma and Tyler to school, she noticed other parents in their SUVs, sipping coffee from expensive cups, their children dressed in name-brand clothes. Once, she'd been one of them. David's accounting firm had provided a comfortable life, not wealthy, but secure. They'd owned a house with a backyard where Tyler could hunt for dinosaur bones and Emma could plant fairy gardens. They'd planned family vacations and college funds and retirement. Now, she was invisible to those parents, just another struggling single mother who didn't quite fit into their world anymore. "Mrs. Martinez?" The teacher's voice pulled Rachel from her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson stood at the school entrance, her expression gentle but concerned. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Rachel's stomach dropped. Had she forgotten to pack lunch money again? Was Tyler acting out in class? "The children are doing wonderfully," Mrs. Henderson said quickly, reading Rachel's panic. "But I wanted you to know. Tyler mentioned that you might be moving soon. The class is working on a project about my neighborhood, and he seemed confused about what to write." Heat flooded Rachel's cheeks. She'd been so careful not to let the children know how desperate their situation had become. "We're exploring our options," she said carefully. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her eyes kind but knowing. "Of course. I just wanted you to know that if you need any resources, food pantries, assistance programs, job placement services, I have a list." Many families go through difficult transitions. The word transitions was gentle, diplomatic. But Rachel heard what it really meant: poverty, desperation, failure. That afternoon, While the children napped, Rachel stared at the stack of job applications on her coffee table. Each one represented a different version of her future, none of them bright. But one caught her eye. Janitorial position available, Sterling and Associates corporate offices. Entry level. Benefits available after 90 days. Sterling and Associates. She'd heard the name before, a successful marketing firm downtown. The kind of place where David might have done their books if he'd lived. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was applying to clean the offices of the type of company where she'd once belonged. But as she filled out the application, something shifted inside her. Maybe cleaning toilets and emptying trash cans wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. It had health insurance. It had dignity, even if the world didn't see it that way. She printed her resume at the public library the next day, the cheap paper slightly crooked in the printer. As she looked at it, her throat tightened. For years of unemployment stared back at her. For years that the world would see as wasted time, but which she knew had been the most important work of her life. Standing in that library, surrounded by other people searching for jobs, applying for assistance, trying to rebuild their lives, Rachel made a decision. She wouldn't lie about those 4 years. She wouldn't apologize for choosing love over career, for choosing presence over paycheck. If they wanted to know what she'd been doing, she'd tell them. And maybe, just maybe, someone would understand that taking care of the people you love, watching them live, watching them die, helping them find courage in their darkest moments, was the most valuable experience of all. The interview was scheduled for Friday morning. As Rachel hung up the phone, her hands shaking with a mixture of hope and terror, she didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. She didn't know that sometimes, the most broken people create the most beautiful stories. All she knew was that she had to try. For Emma, who still believed in fairy tales. For Tyler, who still thought his mommy could fix anything. And maybe, just maybe, for herself. 2 years earlier, Rachel's world had begun to crumble on a Tuesday that started like any other. She was packing Emma's lunch, humming softly while Tyler argued with his cereal about why dinosaurs couldn't really live in milk bowls, when David stumbled into the kitchen. Ratch. His voice was strange, thin, like it was coming from far away. I can't, something's wrong with my arm. She looked up to find her husband of 10 years leaning against the doorframe, his left arm hanging useless at his side, his face pale and confused. The apple she'd been slicing tumbled from her hand, hitting the floor with a wet thud. David. She was moving toward him before her mind fully processed what she was seeing. David, what's happening? I don't know. I woke up and I can't feel it. I can't move it. His voice cracked, and Rachel saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, animal fear. The next few hours blurred together like a nightmare played at double speed. The frantic call to 911. The neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, appearing to watch the children. The ambulance ride where David squeezed her hand with his good arm and whispered, I'm scared, Rachel. What if this is something bad? She'd held his hand and lied with a smile. It's probably just a pinched nerve. You'll see. We'll be home by dinner. But they weren't home by dinner. They weren't home for weeks. The diagnosis came from Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken neurologist with kind eyes who delivered devastating news in the gentlest possible way. ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that would steal David's ability to move, to speak, to breathe. How long? Rachel had asked, her voice barely a whisper. It varies, Dr. Patel said carefully. Some patients live many years with proper care. Others, 2 to 5 years is typical. Rachel felt the world tilt sideways. David was 34 years old. Emma was 6. Tyler was 4. They were supposed to have decades together. Little league games and dance recitals, graduations and weddings, grandchildren and gray hair. There has to be something, she said, her voice growing stronger, more desperate. Treatments, clinical trials, something. Dr. Patel's expression was infinitely compassionate. We'll explore every option. But I want you to understand, this disease is unforgiving. The best thing you can do is make the time you have count. That night, as David slept fitfully in his hospital bed, Rachel sat in the uncomfortable chair beside him and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a list of everything she was about to lose. Her job as a marketing coordinator. She'd have to quit to care for him. Their financial security, Medical bills would eat through their savings like wildfire. Their future, every plan they'd made was suddenly meaningless. But at the top of the list, she wrote, "Time with David. Time for the children to know their father. Time to love while we can." The decision to leave her job wasn't really a decision at all. When David came home from the hospital, unable to use his left arm, struggling with fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure, someone needed to be there. Someone needed to drive him to appointments, manage his medications, help him shower, cook meals he could actually swallow. "You don't have to do this," he said one evening as she helped him into bed. His speech was still clear then, though she'd already learned to listen for the slight slur that meant he was tired. "We could hire someone. You worked so hard for your career." Rachel smoothed the blanket over his chest, her hands gentle and sure. "My career will wait. This can't." But David shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I'm ruining everything. Your job, our savings, the kids' future. Maybe I should just—" "Stop." Rachel's voice was fierce, final. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. We're going to fight this together, and we're going to love each other through it. That's what marriage means." What she didn't tell him was that she was terrified. Terrified of watching the man she loved disappear piece by piece. Terrified of explaining to their children why Daddy couldn't throw a baseball anymore. Terrified of the bills that arrived daily, each one larger than the last. The first year was the hardest in ways she hadn't expected. David was angry at his body, at God, at the cruel randomness of disease. He threw things with his good arm and raged at his growing weakness. He pushed her away emotionally, even as he needed her physically more each day. "I'm not your husband anymore," he said one particularly dark evening. "I'm your patient, your burden." Rachel was folding laundry at the foot of their bed, and she stopped, holding one of his shirts against her chest. It was too big for him now. The disease was stealing his muscle mass along with everything else. "You want to know what you are?" she said quietly. "You're the man who still tells Emma bedtime stories even when your voice is tired. You're the man who helps Tyler build dinosaur habitats out of couch cushions. You're the man who holds my hand during scary movies and laughs at my terrible jokes." She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his good hand in both of hers. "The disease is taking your body, David. Don't let it take your heart." Something shifted after that conversation. David stopped fighting what was happening and started embracing what remained. He recorded video messages for the children's future birthdays, graduations, weddings. He wrote letters, first by hand, then by voice to text as his fingers stopped working. Rachel became a different person during those 4 years. Not weaker, as she'd expected, but stronger. She learned to give injections, to operate feeding tubes, to read the subtle signs that meant David was in pain, but trying not to show it. She became a physical therapist, a speech therapist, a respiratory therapist. She became an expert in insurance claims and medical equipment and the strange bureaucracy of dying. But more than that, she became a storyteller. When David could no longer speak clearly, she learned to interpret his gestures, his expressions, his eyes. When he could no longer move, she became his voice, telling the children about their father's childhood, his dreams, his pride in them. "Tell them about the dinosaur," David would whisper, his words barely audible. And Rachel would gather Tyler on her lap and spin the tale David had told her, about how their father had once found a real dinosaur bone in his backyard when he was Tyler's age, how he'd kept it under his bed and dreamed of becoming a paleontologist. "Is it true, Mommy?" Tyler would ask, wide-eyed. "It's true in the way that matters most," Rachel would say. "It's true because Daddy wants you to know that dreams are important, even when they change." The last 6 months were the cruelest. David could no longer eat solid food, could barely whisper, could only move his eyes. But those eyes, they still blazed with love, with gratitude, with a fierce desire to stay as long as possible. Rachel slept in a chair beside his hospital bed, which they'd moved into the living room, so he could still be part of the family's daily life. She learned to read his needs in the flutter of his eyelashes, the slight movement of his lips. Emma and Tyler adapted with the heartbreaking resilience of children. Emma would sit beside her father's bed and show him her drawings, describing each picture in elaborate detail. Tyler would bring his toy dinosaurs and create elaborate adventures where the brave Triceratops helped the sick Brontosaurus feel better. On the Tuesday David died, Rachel was holding his hand, reading him a story about a brave knight who loved his family so much that even death couldn't break the connection. His breathing had been labored for days, but suddenly it simply stopped. The silence was deafening. Tyler's birthday party 3 days later was the hardest thing Rachel had ever done. But as she lit the candles on the dinosaur cake she'd made at 2 a.m., she heard David's voice in her memory. Don't let grief steal their childhood. Let them be happy. So she sang Happy Birthday with a voice that barely worked, and she smiled as Tyler blew out his candles, and she tucked both children into bed with stories about how Daddy was now the strongest angel in heaven, watching over them always. But later, alone in her empty bedroom, Rachel finally allowed herself to fall apart. The woman who had been a caregiver, a nurse, a protector, a warrior, that woman crumbled into a million pieces. She had no idea how to put herself back together. She had no idea that the skills she'd learned in those 4 terrible, beautiful years would become her greatest strength. She only knew that she was alone, broke, and responsible for 2 children who were counting on her to somehow make everything okay. The eviction notice in her purse was just the latest reminder that love, no matter how fierce, couldn't pay the bills. But maybe, just maybe, it could open doors she never expected to walk through. Rachel stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., trying to transform herself into someone who looked like she deserved a job. The face staring back at her was tired, not just sleep-deprived tired, but soul-deep exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, and her once glossy hair hung limp around her shoulders. She'd bought the outfit at Goodwill 3 days earlier, a navy blue blazer with a small stain on the lapel that she'd managed to mostly hide with a brooch that had belonged to her mother, and black pants that were slightly too long but would have to do. The whole ensemble had cost $12. $12 she couldn't really afford, but couldn't afford not to spend. "Mommy, you look pretty," Emma said from the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Rachel's throat tightened. Even now, especially now, her daughter saw beauty where Rachel saw only desperation. "Thank you, sweetheart. Remember, Mrs. Patterson is picking you up for school today, and she'll watch you until I get back. Are you getting the job today?" Tyler appeared beside his sister, his hair sticking up in 12 different directions. "The one where you clean up messes?" Rachel knelt down, straightening Tyler's dinosaur pajamas. "I'm going to try my very best. But you know what? Even if I don't get this job, there will be other jobs. Mommy always finds a way." The words felt hollow, but the children nodded solemnly, believing in her with the absolute faith that only children possess. She kissed them both goodbye, breathing in their warmth, drawing strength from their trust. The bus ride downtown took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of watching Seattle wake up around her. Business people in expensive suits sipped coffee while checking their phones. Students with backpacks chatted excitedly about weekend plans. Everyone seemed to have a purpose, a place they belonged. Rachel clutched her folder containing her resume, 3 copies printed at the library on paper that wasn't quite white enough. She'd rewritten it 17 times, trying to find a way to explain the 4-year gap without sounding like she was making excuses. Sterling and Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building. The lobby was all marble and glass, with modern art that probably cost more than Rachel's annual rent. She felt like an imposter walking across that polished floor, her Goodwill heels clicking too loudly in the cathedral-like space. "I'm here for an interview," she told the receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a smile that was professionally warm but didn't reach her eyes. "Name?" "Rachel Martinez." "For the janitorial position." The receptionist's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not unfriendly, but suddenly more distant. "Certainly. Please have a seat. Ms. Chin will be with you shortly." Rachel sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget and tried not to fidget. Around her, employees moved with the confident efficiency of people who belonged in this world. She caught fragments of conversations about client presentations, marketing campaigns, budget forecasts, the language of success she'd once spoken fluently. "Rachel Martinez?" The voice belonged to a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple gray dress and sensible shoes, not fancy, but professional in a way that spoke of competence rather than flash. "I'm Mira Chun, Human Resources Director." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "Thank you for coming in." They walked to a small conference room with a window overlooking the city. Mira gestured for Rachel to sit, then settled across from her with a manila folder. "I'll be honest," Mira said, opening the folder. "We don't usually conduct formal interviews for janitorial positions. Most people just fill out an application, we check references, and that's it. But your application caught my attention." Rachel's heart hammered. "Oh, you have a bachelor's degree in marketing, 5 years of professional experience, excellent references from your previous job, and then a 4-year gap. Most people in your situation would apply for marketing positions, not custodial work. I'm curious about your story." This was it. The moment Rachel had been dreading and preparing for. She could lie, make up some story about wanting a career change, about finding fulfillment in simpler work. But looking at Myra's open, expectant face, she realized she didn't want to lie. "My husband got sick," Rachel said simply. "ALS. I left my job to take care of him." Myra's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. He died 8 months ago." The words still felt strange in her mouth, like a foreign language she was still learning to speak. "I'm a single mother now, with 2 children. I need work, steady work with benefits. I know custodial work isn't glamorous, but it's honest, and it would allow me to provide for my family." Mira nodded slowly. "Would you mind if we went through your resume together? I'd like to understand what you've been doing during those 4 years." Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she opened her folder. This was the moment of truth. Would this woman see value in the hardest work Rachel had ever done, or would she see only wasted time? "Of course," Rachel said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'd be happy to explain." She looked down at the resume she'd agonized over, at the careful words she'd chosen to describe experiences that couldn't really be captured on paper. "How do you quantify love? How do you measure the value of presence?" But as she began to speak, something shifted inside her. Maybe she couldn't quantify it, but she could share it. She could tell the truth about what those 4 years had taught her, about the skills she'd gained, about the person she'd become. And maybe, just maybe, someone would understand. Rachel cleared her throat and looked down at the paper that held 4 years of her life distilled into bullet points and careful phrases. Her voice was quiet but steady as she began. 2018 to 2022, full-time caregiver and life teacher. She looked up at Mira, who was listening intently. "That was the year my husband David got his diagnosis. ALS. I had to leave my marketing job to take care of him and the kids. I learned a lot during those years. Not just about medicine or managing a progressive illness, but about how to keep a home soft and warm even when life gets impossibly hard." Mira leaned forward slightly, her expression encouraging Rachel to continue. Rachel's finger traced to the next line. "Became proficient in medical equipment operation, medication management, and physical therapy assistance." She paused, remembering. David needed a feeding tube eventually, and breathing treatments, and so many machines. "I learned to operate equipment that most people only see in hospitals. I became his physical therapist, helping him maintain what movement he could for as long as possible. The insurance company wanted to put him in a facility," Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger. "But I knew he needed to be home, with his children, as part of our family. So I learned. I studied. I became whatever he needed me to be." Mira was taking notes, but her eyes never left Rachel's face. "Developed expertise in nutritional planning for complex medical conditions." Rachel smiled sadly. "When David could no longer swallow solid food, I had to learn about tube feeding, about getting proper nutrition into someone whose body was shutting down. But before that, when he could still eat but was losing weight, I became creative. I learned to make smoothies that packed maximum calories and nutrition into small portions he could manage. I researched every supplement, every protein powder, every way to keep him strong for as long as possible." She moved to the next section, her voice growing more confident. "Learn the art of storytelling by inventing bedtime tales that could stop tears midstream." She looked up at Mira with a genuine smile. "Emma, my daughter, was 7 when David got sick. She didn't understand why her daddy couldn't play with her anymore, why he got tired so easily. She had nightmares. So every night, I invented new stories about heroes who wore rain boots and had capes made of kitchen towels. Stories about brave princesses who helped their kingdoms through difficult times. She believed in those heroes," Rachel continued, her voice soft with memory. "And somehow, Believing in them made her brave too. She stopped having nightmares. She started helping with Tyler, showing him how to be gentle with Daddy. Myra's pen had stopped moving. She was completely absorbed in Rachel's words. Mastered conflict resolution between a dinosaur-obsessed 6-year-old and a glitter-loving 8-year-old. Rachel laughed, a sound that was both tired and fond. You'd be amazed what peace negotiations over mac and cheese can teach you about patience and fairness. Tyler would want to tell Daddy all about velociraptors during dinner, but Emma needed to show him her latest art project. They were both desperate for attention, both scared about what was happening to our family. I learned to give them each what they needed while keeping the peace. I became a diplomat, a mediator, a referee. But mostly, I learned to see the fear behind the fighting and address that instead of just the behavior. Rachel's finger found the next line, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Became a home nurse, birthday magician, and grief counselor. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her courage for the hardest part. David died on a Tuesday in March. Tyler's birthday was that Friday. Rachel's voice was steady, but Mira could see the pain in her eyes. I had been up for 3 days straight in those final weeks, managing his care, holding his hand, making sure he wasn't alone. But Tyler was turning 7, and he needed his birthday to be special. He needed to know that life would continue, that joy was still possible. So I baked his dinosaur cake at 2 in the morning after the funeral home had taken David's body. I blew up balloons and hung streamers and invited his friends. And when he blew out his candles, I sang happy birthday with everything I had left. Myra's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's when I learned that grief doesn't pause for birthdays or holidays or ordinary Tuesday mornings when kids need breakfast. I learned to carry heartbreak and hope at the same time. I learned to help my children process the biggest loss of their young lives while managing my own. Rachel moved to the final section, her voice growing stronger again. Specialized in crisis management and resource optimization under extreme constraints. She looked directly at Mira. When your husband is dying and you have no income, you learn to make miracles happen with nothing. I learned to stretch $1 until it screamed. I learned to find free activities that would keep children happy and distracted. I learned to negotiate with insurance companies and medical billing departments. I learned to prioritize ruthlessly what could wait, what couldn't, what was worth fighting for, and what wasn't worth the energy. I learned to ask for help when I needed it and to give help when I could manage it. I learned to manage catastrophic stress while maintaining a household and raising 2 children. Rachel closed her folder and looked up at Mira. I know this resume doesn't look like traditional work experience, but those 4 years taught me more about problem solving, multitasking, crisis management, and grace under pressure than any job I've ever had. I learned to work with dignity in impossible circumstances. I learned that every job, no matter how small it might seem to others, has value if you do it with care. I'm applying for this custodial position because I need steady work with benefits to support my children. But I want you to know that I won't just be cleaning your offices. I'll be taking care of the space where your employees work, making sure it's clean and comfortable and welcoming. I'll be maintaining an environment where people can do their best work. I understand the value of creating a space where people feel safe and cared for. I've been doing it for 4 years. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the building's air conditioning. Mira sat back in her chair, her pen forgotten, looking at Rachel with an expression that was part amazement, part respect, and part something else, recognition, maybe, or understanding. Finally, Mira spoke, her voice thick with emotion. Rachel, you came here applying to clean our floors. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But you just cleaned my heart. Rachel looked down, suddenly self-conscious. Had she shared too much? Had she made this professional woman uncomfortable with her raw honesty? But Mira wasn't done. We don't need a janitor, she said quietly. We need you. Rachel stared at Mira, certain she had misheard. The air in the conference room seemed to thicken, and she could feel her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird desperate to escape its cage. I'm sorry, what? Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. Mira stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline for a moment before turning back to Rachel. Her expression was thoughtful, determined, as if she was working through a complex problem in real time. Rachel, I've been in human resources for 15 years. I've interviewed thousands of people. Most of them tell me what they think I want to hear, buzzwords about synergy and paradigm shifts, carefully rehearsed stories about their greatest weaknesses being that they're too dedicated. Mira sat back down, leaning forward earnestly. But you just told me about the most difficult period of your life with such honesty, such grace. You turned 4 years of unimaginable hardship into a testament to your character, your capabilities, your strength. Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just told you the truth. Exactly. Mira opened her laptop and began typing. And the truth is that you have skills our company desperately needs, even if you don't realize it yet. She turned the laptop screen toward Rachel, showing what appeared to be an organizational chart. 6 months ago, we lost our employee wellness coordinator. Sarah was wonderful. She organized our work-life balance initiatives, managed our employee assistance programs, coordinated support for staff going through difficult times. But she moved to Portland, and we haven't been able to find the right replacement. Rachel looked at the screen, confused. I don't understand what this has to do with. You managed a household through a medical crisis. You coordinated care, managed resources, provided emotional support. You created stability for your children in the midst of chaos. You literally became a wellness coordinator for your family. Mira clicked to another screen showing a job description. This position involves supporting employees dealing with personal crises, coordinating with insurance and medical providers, organizing wellness initiatives, and creating programs that help our staff maintain work-life balance. The starting salary is $48,000 annually, plus full benefits. Rachel's vision went blurry around the edges. $48,000. More than twice what the janitorial position paid. Enough to keep their apartment, to buy groceries without calculating every penny, to maybe even start saving for the children's future. But I don't have experience in corporate wellness, Rachel said, her practical mind warring with the hope blooming in her chest. I don't have certifications or training in. You have something better, Mira interrupted gently. You have lived experience. You know what it's like to juggle work and caregiving. You understand the stress of managing medical crises while trying to maintain normalcy for your family. You know what kind of support actually helps and what feels like empty gestures. Mira pulled out another folder. Our employees are struggling, Rachel. We lost 3 good people last year, not to better job offers, but to burnout. One woman had to quit when her mother got dementia because she couldn't figure out how to manage caregiving and work. Another left when his son was diagnosed with autism because he needed more flexibility than we were offering. They left because we didn't know how to support them. We have an employee assistance program, but it's generic, corporate, impersonal. We need someone who understands that when life falls apart, people need practical help, not just a pamphlet about stress management. Rachel stared at the job description, her mind reeling. But what if I'm not what you need? What if I fail? Myra's smile was warm and steady. Rachel, you kept a family together through an unimaginable crisis. You turned a dying man's last years into a gift for his children. You're raising 2 kids as a single mother while applying for any job that will keep a roof over their heads. How exactly do you think you could fail at helping people? The question hung in the air between them, and Rachel felt something shift inside her chest. Not just hope, but recognition. For 4 years, she had felt like she was failing at everything. Failing to cure David's disease, failing to keep their finances stable, failing to protect her children from pain. But maybe she hadn't failed. Maybe she had succeeded at something much more important than she'd realized. There's one more thing, Mira said, opening yet another folder. This position comes with flexible scheduling. Core hours are 9 to 3, with the understanding that sometimes you'll need to work evenings for programs or events. But if your son has a school play or your daughter has a doctor's appointment, you handle it. We believe that employees who are supported in their personal lives do better work. Rachel felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. I need to think about this. It's so much more than I expected, and I want to make sure I can do the job justice. Of course. Mira reached across the table and squeezed Rachel's hand. But can I tell you something? When I first became HR director here, I was terrified. I had the education, the certifications, all the right credentials. But I didn't have wisdom. I made mistakes because I was trying to manage people's lives from a textbook. You have wisdom, Rachel. You've earned it the hard way. That's worth more than any degree. Rachel wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. When would you need an answer? Take the weekend. Talk to your children. Think it over. but I hope you'll say yes. I think you could help us build something really meaningful here." As they stood to leave, Mira paused. "Can I ask you something? What would David think about this opportunity?" Rachel smiled through her tears, and for the first time in months, the smile reached her eyes. "He would say that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He always believed that our hardest experiences were preparing us for something we couldn't see yet." She paused, remembering David's voice during one of their last conversations, when he could barely whisper but still wanted to share his thoughts about their future. "He told me that taking care of people was my superpower. I thought he was just being sweet, trying to make me feel better about giving up my career. But maybe he saw something I couldn't see." Mira walked Rachel to the elevator, and as the doors opened, she handed her a business card. "My personal cell phone is on the back. Call me this weekend if you have any questions." Any questions at all? As the elevator descended, Rachel stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at her was the same one who had arrived that morning. Tired, worried, desperate. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since David's death, she felt like she might actually have a future worth hoping for. The bus ride home passed in a blur of possibility and disbelief. Rachel kept pulling out the job description, reading it again and again, afraid it might disappear if she looked away too long. Employee Wellness Coordinator. $48,000 annually. Full benefits. Flexible scheduling. It felt too good to be true, which made her nervous. Life had taught her to be suspicious of unexpected gifts, to look for the catch hidden in the small print. But as the bus pulled into her neighborhood, she found herself thinking about the employees Mira had mentioned. The woman who left to care for her mother, the man who couldn't balance work and his son's needs. She thought about how desperately she would have wanted someone to understand when David was sick, someone who could have helped her navigate the impossible choices between career and caregiving. Maybe this wasn't too good to be true. Maybe this was exactly what she had been prepared for, even if she hadn't known it at the time. Mrs. Patterson was waiting on the front steps with Emma and Tyler when Rachel arrived home, and the children ran to her with the kind of enthusiasm that made her heart feel too big for her chest. "Mommy, did you get the job? Are we going to stay in our house?" Emma's questions tumbled over each other, her 8-year-old mind cutting straight to the heart of what mattered. Tyler wrapped his arms around Rachel's waist, his face serious. "Mrs. Patterson said you went to ask for work. Did they say yes?" Rachel knelt down, gathering both children close, breathing in their familiar scent of playground dirt and childhood optimism. How could she explain what had happened? How could she make them understand that sometimes the universe surprises you with exactly what you need, even when you didn't know you needed it? "Well," she said, settling cross-legged on the grass so she could look at them directly, "I went to apply for one job, but they offered me a different one instead." "A better one?" Emma asked, hope lighting up her eyes. "Maybe. It's a job helping people who are going through hard times, kind of like what we've been going through. The company thinks I might be good at it because I've learned how to take care of people when things get difficult." Tyler processed this with the methodical seriousness he applied to everything. "Like how you took care of Daddy when he was sick?" "Exactly like that." Rachel's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "They think that because I learned how to help our family during a really hard time, I might be able to help other families too." "Will you make enough money?" Emma asked, cutting to the practical heart of the matter with the directness of a child who had overheard too many worried conversations about bills. Rachel pulled her daughter closer. "If I take this job, we'll be okay. More than okay. We'll be able to stay in our apartment and buy groceries without counting every penny, and maybe even save some money for things like new school clothes and maybe a vacation someday." Both children's eyes went wide. A vacation had become mythical in their household, something that belonged to the time before, when Daddy was healthy and money wasn't a constant source of anxiety. After Mrs. Patterson left and the children were settled with snacks and cartoons, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with the job description spread in front of her. She made a list, not of pros and cons, but of fears and hopes. Fears. What if she wasn't qualified? What if she failed? What if this was some kind of mistake, and they rescinded the offer once they realized she was just a desperate single mother with no real credentials? Hopes, financial security, meaningful work, the chance to help people the way she wished someone had helped her, the opportunity to turn her pain into purpose. She thought about David, about the conversations they'd had during his final months when he was still able to speak clearly. He'd worried constantly about what would happen to her and the children after he was gone. "You're stronger than you know," he'd whispered one evening as she helped him with his medication. "You've been taking care of everyone for so long, but someday you're going to need to let someone take care of you too." Maybe this job was that, not just an opportunity to care for others, but to be cared for in return. A steady salary, health insurance, paid time off. The basic securities that she had taken for granted when David was alive. That night, after she'd tucked the children into bed with stories about brave dinosaurs and magical princesses, Rachel called her sister Maria in Phoenix. Maria was the only family she had left, and while they'd grown apart over the years, she was the only person who truly understood Rachel's situation. "A corporate wellness job?" Maria's voice crackled through the phone connection. "Rachel, that's amazing. But are you sure you're ready for something like that? It's been such a hard year." "I don't know if I'm ready," Rachel admitted, curling up on her couch with a cup of tea. "But I don't think anyone ever feels ready for the things that matter most. I wasn't ready to be a caregiver when David got sick. I wasn't ready to be a widow at 35. I wasn't ready to be a single mother trying to make it on my own." "But you did all of those things anyway," Maria said softly. "Yeah, I did. And maybe that's the point. Maybe being ready isn't about having all the answers or feeling confident. Maybe it's about being willing to try, even when you're scared." They talked for another hour, and by the time Rachel hung up, she knew what her answer would be. Saturday morning, she took the children to the Seattle Center, using the last of her emergency cash for bus fare and hot dogs from a vendor. They rode the monorail and visited the Pacific Science Center, where Tyler could indulge his dinosaur obsession and Emma could marvel at the butterfly exhibit. As they sat on a bench eating their hot dogs, watching families enjoy the sunny afternoon, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the ability to imagine a future. Not just survival, but actual happiness. Birthday parties without financial anxiety. Christmas mornings without the weight of unpaid bills. Family outings that didn't require careful budgeting and penny pinching. "Mommy," Emma said, mustard on her chin and contentment in her voice, "this is the best day we've had in a long time." "It really is," Rachel agreed, pulling both children close. "And I think we're going to have more days like this." Sunday evening, after the children were asleep, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with her phone in her hand and Myra's business card in front of her. She'd been staring at the numbers for 10 minutes, building up the courage to make the call that would change everything. Finally, she dialed. "Mira? It's Rachel Martinez. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Rachel, not at all. I've been hoping to hear from you. What have you decided?" Rachel took a deep breath, thinking about David's belief in her strength, about her children's trust in her ability to make everything okay, about the possibility of turning her hardest experiences into something that could help others. "I'd like to accept the position," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I want to try to help people the way I wish someone had helped me." "That's wonderful news." Myra's joy was evident even through the phone. "I'm so excited to have you join our team. Can you start Monday?" "Monday?" Rachel's heart skipped. "That's soon. I know it's quick, but we have an employee who's been struggling with a family situation, and I think you could really help her. Plus, our quarterly wellness program planning meeting is next week, and I'd love to have your input." After they hung up, Rachel sat in her quiet kitchen, surrounded by the modest life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. Tomorrow, she would wake up as an employee wellness coordinator at Sterling and Associates. Tomorrow, she would begin a career she'd never imagined, in a job that felt designed specifically for the person she'd become. She thought about the resume that had started it all, those careful words that had tried to capture the uncapturable, the way she'd transformed her greatest loss into her greatest strength. David had been right. Their hardest experiences had been preparing her for something she couldn't see. And now, finally, she could see it. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The employee break room at Sterling and Associates hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of coffee cups. Rachel stood at the front of the room, looking out at the faces of her colleagues. People who had become more than coworkers, who had become a community. "I want to share something with you all," she began, her voice carrying the confidence that had grown over the past 6 months. "When I first started here, Mira told me that I was hired because I understood what it meant to help people during their hardest times. I thought she was just being kind." She gestured to a wall display behind her, photos and testimonials from employees who had participated in the wellness programs she'd developed. There was Janet, who had been able to keep working while caring for her husband with Alzheimer's, thanks to the flexible scheduling and caregiver support group Rachel had established. There was Marcus, whose teenage daughter's anxiety had been overwhelming his family until Rachel connected him with resources and helped him navigate the insurance maze for mental health services. But I've learned that helping people isn't just about having the right answers or the perfect solutions. It's about showing up with your whole heart and saying, "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." The room was quiet, attentive. These were people who had come to trust Rachel's guidance, who had seen her transform their workplace culture from one of individual struggle to collective support. Today marks 6 months since I started this job, Rachel continued. 6 months since I walked into Myra's office applying for a janitorial position and somehow ended up here instead. And I want you to know that every single one of you has taught me something about resilience, about community, about the ways we can lift each other up. She paused, her eyes finding Mira in the crowd. But mostly, I've learned that our broken places can become our strongest places if we're willing to let them. After the presentation, as people filtered back to their desks, Mira approached Rachel with a familiar manila folder in her hands. "What's that?" Rachel asked, though she was smiling because she recognized the look in Myra's eyes, the same expression she'd had 6 months ago when she'd offered Rachel a job she'd never imagined. "A performance review," Mira said, trying to look serious but failing to hide her grin. "And a proposal." Rachel opened the folder to find a job description for a newly created position, Director of Employee Wellness and Family Support. The salary made her blink twice. "We want to expand the program company-wide," Mira explained. "All of our offices across 5 states. We want you to train other coordinators, develop standardized programs, create a model that other companies can follow." Rachel stared at the papers, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate single mother clutching an eviction notice to a woman being offered the chance to impact hundreds of families across the country. "There's one more thing," Mira said, pulling out another document. "We want to establish the David Martinez Memorial Fund for Employee Family Crisis Support, named after your husband, to help employees facing medical crises maintain their careers while caring for their loved ones." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "David would be so proud," she whispered. "He'd be proud of you," Mira corrected gently. "You took the hardest thing that ever happened to you and turned it into hope for so many people." That evening, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd once circled want ads with desperate determination, helping Emma with homework while Tyler built elaborate dinosaur civilizations out of blocks. The eviction notice was gone, replaced by a lease renewal and a small savings account that grew a little each month. But more than the financial security, it was the sense of purpose that had transformed their lives. Rachel had work that mattered, that used every skill she'd gained during those 4 difficult years with David. She had colleagues who valued her insight, families who trusted her guidance, a future that stretched ahead with possibility rather than just survival. "Mommy," Tyler said, looking up from his dinosaur village, "remember when you were sad all the time after Daddy died?" Rachel's breath caught. "I remember. You're not sad like that anymore," he observed with 6-year-old directness. "You're still a little sad sometimes, but it's different. Like the dinosaurs who lost their families but found new herds." Emma looked up from her math homework. "Daddy would like your new job, wouldn't he? Helping people like he wanted to help people with his numbers work." "I think he would," Rachel agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "I think he'd say we found a way to make something beautiful out of something hard." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Rachel stood in her bathroom, looking at the same mirror where she'd tried to transform herself into someone who deserved a job 6 months earlier. The woman looking back at her now was different, not because her circumstances had changed, though they had, but because she had learned to see herself through different eyes. She was no longer a desperate single mother with a gap in her resume. She was a professional who had turned her deepest pain into her greatest strength. She was a woman who had learned that sometimes the most unexpected doors lead to exactly where you're meant to be. And she was living proof that the hardest chapters of our lives are often just the beginning of the most beautiful stories we'll ever tell. In her purse, she still carried a copy of that original resume. the one that had described 4 years of caregiving as professional experience, that had refused to apologize for choosing love over career advancement. She kept it as a reminder that our broken places can become our sacred places if we're brave enough to share them with the world. Sometimes the most qualified person for the job is the one who has lived through what others are facing. Sometimes the best credential is a heart that has been broken and rebuilt with compassion. And sometimes, when you show up as exactly who you are, scars and strengths and all, the universe responds by giving you exactly what you never knew you needed. Rachel Martinez had learned to write her pain into purpose, her struggle into strength, her ending into a beginning. And in doing so, she had discovered that redemption isn't just about surviving the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain and then teaching others the steps. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.